Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is the first time you're here. Today I'm going to do the simplest type of dyeing possible, which is solar dyeing. It doesn't require electricity or special equipment, anything like that. So I'm just going to introduce you to the concepts, what I'm going to use, and then we'll get underway. The reason I like solar dyeing is it relies just purely on the action of the sun through the glass jar onto the fabric with the application of various plant materials. In relation to solar dyeing is that it works because you leave everything sitting in the sun for a long period of time, and I'm talking months. Now, you'll probably see maybe some colour coming out early, but the longer you can leave your bottle of dye, and all it has to do is sit in a window, best if it's something facing into the sun, but even if it was an indirect light, that would still work, because the contents are just going to stay slowly warmed over the period of time that they're in the jar, and the dye molecules are going to be released from the plant materials and hopefully go into your fibre. I will also just make a quick diversion and talk a little bit about the difference between dyeing and printing. So some of you may have seen my botanical printing videos, and in that situation we're actually taking a direct print from the leaves of the plant onto the fabric. Dyeing, on the other hand, is about general removal of colour from the material, so getting the dye molecules out of the plant and into your fibre. So I'm not expecting to get clear prints. I'm really looking here to get colours. Now, because I'm using different fibres in my dye pot, the silk and the wool I would expect to take the dye up better and have a stronger colour, and I would not expect to have quite as much colour going into the cotton. But again, that's something that has got so many variables in it. It would be interesting to see what happens over time. So this may not be something that springs to your mind, but I really strongly suggest that you label your jar with the dye material, the date, and you can put in extra things like what's in there as well. And this is important because, believe you me, you may think you're going to remember it now, particularly if you've got a whole lot of things happening. I can guarantee you're very unlikely to remember what went in the jar on the day or the day it went in. The other thing I've just prepared is I've kept a sample of 3 fibres that I've used. I haven't actually put in a sample of the thread, but I've got some spare. I'll put that in as well, so that I can see when it comes out of the jar in a couple of months' time just what difference, if any, there's been in the fibre. It's very straightforward, or you can make sure you take good photos of what you're doing, and then you'll have a record. The tricky thing is with dyeing with plants is that there's absolutely no guarantee of getting the same result other than in broad terms repeatedly. So if you've got something special that you want to dye, I suggest you get it all in to the same dye pot, whether that's a solar dye pot or a more traditional boiling up type dye pot. So here I have ready to dye some various pieces of fabric. I've got some wool from some old undergarments which have got some interesting patches on them, and because the patches have been done with different types of thread, they may or may not take up the dye differently. This I think has been stitched with cotton, and this has been stitched with wool. This is a small piece of light silk, and silk and wool are both what we call protein fibres. So they're fibres from animals, sheep's wool, and this is the secretion of silkworms. I'm also going to be dyeing a piece of cotton, and this is actually, as you can probably see from the shape, this is part of a pocket from an old pair of worn cotton trousers, and you can see they're faded because the colours differs from one side to the other. I just want to say one thing, and that is that cotton, unlike wool and silk, is a cellulose fibre, and it's actually more challenging to dye. Wool and silk, because of the structure of the materials, is actually much more amenable to taking up dyes than cellulose fibres like cotton or linen, or even manufactured ones such as rayon and bamboo. So the best thing if you want to use some fabric is to use old fabric which has been washed lots of times, and I can tell you these trousers were worn for many years, so they've washed. That softened it up. And also too, the most washing detergents for the laundry contain washing soda in some degree, and that actually acts as a chemical bond, and it will help the cotton or the linen or whatever cellulose fibre you have to take up the dye or to bond more strongly with the dye colours. So I'll put that in, and then we'll get on to the next bit. I also have here some thread. I always like to throw a bit of thread in because I do a lot of embroidery in my artworks. I'll often use the thread I dye. So if I've got any sort of dye pot happening, I'll use some thread and put that in as well. The first thing I need to do is make sure that all of the fibre that I'm putting into my glass jar, and you can see this is just a very small glass jar, it's a pickle jar, it's got a metal lid. I really suggest that you find a jar with a good metal lid. Don't do this with a plastic jar. I would do that if I was desperate, but I'd prefer not to. Prefer to have a metal lid, and I'll get around to that later. So what I'm going to do is, I've just got a bowl of water here. It doesn't have to be any particular temperature, and I'm just going to soak my materials in there just so that they get wet all the way through. And one of the things you might notice immediately is the wool is soaking up very unevenly. So everything needs to be soaked through. So one of the things you can do to help that along, just to break the surface tension, is to just take one drop of laundry liquid, washing up detergent, whatever you have, and just mix it around, and that will just help break the surface tension of that. The same goes with this. I'm not 100% sure whether this is cotton or silk or a blend of both. It was a yarn that was given to me by a friend who's a weaver, so it could be either of those, knowing that she weaves with both. So again, this is probably one of the things that will need to soak a little bit longer, just to make sure that it's all nicely damp. And the last thing is the cotton from my old trousers. Right, well, I've got my fabric and all my leaves, the fresh ones, the old ones, the sort of semi-dried ones, and I'm just going to start shoving this into the jar, and that is about the level of it. I am going to take the stems off. I just don't really want the extra bits and pieces in there that aren't necessary, or they would give dye, but given that the bottle's a bit small, I'd rather just put in the leaves this time around. I'll put some fresh leaves in. And then I'm just going to start putting my fabric in. Just squeeze it out a bit. Doesn't need to be perfectly dry. I've just put a towel down to stop the worst of the mess going onto my table. And again, try and get as much plant and other material in as you can. Every little bit is going to help with the dyeing process. I can also do something like, particularly for this cotton, because I don't know how well this is going to take the dye, is I might just shove some leaves inside the cotton. There'll be leaves around the outside of it as well. So just get it all in there. Some more old leaves I found in the bottom of my jar. It's my thread. More leaves. Silk's going on top. Now what's interesting is I could actually still shove a whole other piece of fabric in here, which I may well choose to do. I've got some more spare cotton. I'll be interested to see how that goes. Right, now I've just put all the leaves I can fit into my jar, all my fabrics in there, including a few extra bits I managed to shove in at the last minute. I've got a kettle of just freshly boiled water, and I'm going to slowly pour that in because I want that to fill up the whole jar, and I want to make sure it gets right down to the bottom. So apart from just having a glove so I can hold on to it, I've also just got myself a satay stick just so I can shove that down and make sure that the water goes all the way to the bottom. Just pour it in a bit at a time because there are going to be air bubbles, and you really want to get rid of the air bubbles if at all possible. In fact, you want this to be absolutely full up as close to the top, because there is a possibility, if you don't fill the jar up, that you'll get moulds and other things forming. And I'm going to try and put that up to the absolute maximum that I can. I'm going to put my lid on tight. Now I can see there's a few air bubbles down the bottom, and they're doing their best to pop up out the top. At this point in time, one of the things in terms of trying to make sure you don't get moulds growing is, once you've got your hot water in, turn your jar upside down like that and just let it sit there for a few minutes, and that will help heat the metal lid, which is one of the reasons why I say use a metal lid, and that will actually, or it should if it's a good metal lid, improve the seal of your jar. So here I am with my solar jar ready to go in the window, and I'm not sure, I think I might leave this for quite a few months. I might in fact open it in the middle of the Australian winter just to see what's happening. A few quick suggestions. At this stage, everything's nice and hunky-dory, but please check over the coming days whether your lid is swelling. Now, if your lid is swelling, that means that there's probably some biological activity happening in there, and you need to release that and let any buildup of gases or whatever out. If you find there's moulds and things, then I suggest you might want to just scrape off what you can and top it up with boiling water. But I've got another jar in the window at the moment, and we've been keeping an eye on it, and it's been there for 3 months and we've had no problems. And hopefully you'll have some nice dye in a couple of months' time. See you then.